Thank you for tuning in. I'm Samarth Pathak and I welcome you to the latest edition of UNODC's Deep Dive Dialogues. Today we are observing the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. As many of you know, trafficking in persons is a grave human rights violation and the third biggest crime worldwide. Clearly, it is an imperative for all of us to take action and to act now to protect the victims of this crime. To discuss some of these issues, we are honored to have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. On my left is Ms. Shireen Vakil, Head of Policy and Advocacy at Tata Trusts, Dr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and Mr. Sergey Kapinos, UNODC South Asia's Regional Representative. Thank you all for joining us. I want to begin by asking, how do you think the situation with regard to human trafficking has changed in the last 5 years, especially in the wake of global crisis and conflicts and the emerging forms of technology?
I think that one of the things, the last point that you made, I think one of the biggest changes in the issue of human trafficking is the use of technology. So that in the past, whilst it was very much directly through middlemen, through people that the victims kind of knew, now the whole area of technology makes it much harder to identify and track who the traffickers are, and more so they can reach the people and the young women and the girls, etc., much more directly. So I think that has been one major change, as well as the ability of technology to connect across countries and stuff much easier.
Look, I come at this obviously from a slightly different perspective. I'm much more recently engaged on this issue. I think there are two things that are characterizing what's happening in India. One is that as the squeeze of enforcement tightens on countries around India, the demand is being funneled into India and other countries where enforcement is lax. So that's point number one. Point number two, that what I've noticed over the last 4 years, especially in India, is there is a lot less fear about reporting. So while the NCRB statistics point to a larger number and there's a growth, I don't think that is really directly correlatable to more crime as much as more reporting. So I think both these are clearly defining public policy responses and action, which is that there is more reporting and therefore there is much more visibility of these crimes, and there is clearly a larger demand funneling into India because of its perception of a lax enforced marketplace, if you want to call it that.
Mr. Kapinos?
I'd rather talk about a distance of not 5 but 10 years. So the difference will be more vivid and more conspicuous. So this is really a global crime. And the scale of this crime, unfortunately, is on the rise. We are now can talk about more than 500 global flows of trafficking, much more. And the latest development is, or the latest tendency is to match a different kind of global crime. So the channels for trafficking in drugs are often used for trafficking in persons also, and vice versa. So all kind of trafficking are well intertwined, and this is a tremendous challenge. Another challenge is that the composition of, I would say, crime has also changed. 10 years ago, the main focus of traffickers was sexual exploitation. And of course, the vast majority of victims were women. But now, more and more children are becoming victims of trafficking, and our latest statistics shows that 28% of all victims of trafficking are children, and now 21% are men. And this is another trend towards the increase in the percentage of forced and bonded labor. So 4 out of 10 victims of trafficking are aimed or at forced labor, and 63% of them are men. So this is something new, and of course I agree that enabled online trafficking is a very serious challenge. And one more challenge is still all over the world. This is corruption, which enables traffickers to penetrate and cross borders, etc., etc. This should be tackled as well.
Dr. Chandrasekhar, how do you perceive the political response to this issue? And as a member of parliament, what are some of the initiatives that you have spearheaded in this direction?
So look, I like I said, I'm a technologist, and all of my career in politics was about technology. And in 2014, I was exposed to this because of a citizen who came to me with this problem, and I was shocked by the apathy and the lack of knowledge and the general insensitivity, not just of the political class, but also of the next level, the administrative and the bureaucratic class. So this represents the clearest and the most biggest danger in any fight against trafficking or to protect children, which is that the top layer of policy making in this country has been for many years and decades almost silent to this, or almost like an ostrich in the sand mentality to it, into complete denial. So I believe, however, in the last 3 to 4 years, both the media in India and the political class have woken up to this being not an aberrational situation, rather being something very core and a huge crime that's being committed under their noses. You can see that the trafficking bill that was passed by the parliament has happened as it has happened. So I think the policymakers have woken up to it. It is belated, but it's better late than never, as they say. There is a lot of catch-up to be done, especially in the institutional response, policing, prosecution, judiciary, on the issue of enforcement. There is also a lot more that needs to be done in terms of actually squeezing or helping resolve the issue of financial vulnerabilities that offer these victims out to this so-called demand. So there is a lot more to be done, but I think as a nation we are waking up to the problem, and it's waking up finally because the policymakers and the politicians have been made to wake up.
Ms. Vakil, what is the impact of human trafficking on victims? We often forget the victim's point of view. And what are some of the vulnerabilities that victims face, especially women and children?
I mean, I think it's huge, really, because I think that once a victim's whole life is kind of devastated, and in many cases, especially that there are very large numbers of children, and this is both girls and boys, and trafficking is a kind of complex issue. So a lot of times, I think that's where the lines get blurry, because the young girls, they prey on the economic situation. So it is where people are extremely poor, but also on people's kinds of dreams and aspirations. So it is often the person who is doing the trafficking is a known person, is a local person, lures the person either with promises of money or of going to a big city, wearing lipstick, learning English, a lot of stuff like that. And then of course, once they get them, then either they don't pay, the victims are often subject, even if it isn't for sexual exploitation, even in labor, a lot of harassment, a lot of violence, and then even when they are the ones who are rescued, they often are not, there's huge amount of stigma on them. So many times even their own families do not take them back, they have no other means of livelihood, etc. There are not places of a shelter for them. So I think there are huge the vulnerabilities are definitely economic in nature, and that's why you see where people get trafficked from, and that is not only in India, I'm sure it's across the world, but things like, and especially when you have situations where let's say there are disasters or natural disasters such as floods or droughts, and or in the conflict situations, people are much more vulnerable. And then for the victims, I think there are huge, kind of both the sort of health issues, the mental, psychosocial issues. They have nowhere, they really have nowhere to belong. So in that situation, they are trapped. Children, especially, I think. In India, the statistic is about 60% are children. 45% is for labor. I think a lot of focus goes on the sexual exploitation, which is of course there, but there are a lot of other reasons. And for instance, now with the skewed sex ratio, there's a lot of trafficking for brides. And many times, and in Andhra Pradesh, I was recently in Andhra Pradesh, and actually there's a lot of trafficking. They say it is for brides, but then they take them away and they take them from, say, West Bengal to Haryana, and then the girl is often, raped by several men, and then not married, and then just has to come back, and then the family doesn't want her back. So it's really quite bad, and I think that much more needs to be done. I agree that there is a level of awareness, but we need many more people like Mr. Chandrasekhar, many more MPs and MLAs who are actually want to do something about the situation.
So clearly, stigma is a great issue involved with trafficking. So how do we bring survivors of human trafficking into the response and into the dialogue that we keep having? Because often the criticism is that survivors are left aside, and we kind of pontify over the responses and the dialogue. How do we bring them more involved? And I would like to start with Mr. Kapinos.
I believe the most effective way to address it is to address systematically. Systematically means to begin with policies, developing policies, victim-centered policies. So in this sense, I believe the most important element is building partnerships between the governmental entities and civil society. So if this is done, and if the very, I would say, status or image of a victim is not stigmatized, then it will be a way to develop a kind of an empowered role model for all victims, which should address not only victims or potential victims, but society in general, different layers of society. So this should be done in a big way, and if this is done, I believe we can achieve more tangible results.
Dr. Chandrasekhar.
No, look, I think if the answer to the question is just by examining what has happened in India in the last 3 years, every response by the government has been a consequence of victims or victims' families rising up and being very angry and saying, silence is not a solution, apathy is not acceptable. And so I think victims and victims' families, and I've worked with many of them, they have an important role in a sense to be used, and I use the word not in a bad way, to trigger a very apathetic institutional network into waking up. You saw in Gurgaon, it was really the families that came out and forced the government into action, both the state and the center. In Karnataka, for example, it's a very, very brave victim's mother that decided she can go on camera, she can speak to the media, talk about the experiences to force the prosecution into action. So I think at the centerpiece of any effort that we have in India, and I speak only for India, to really galvanize and move forward at a faster pace to make up for all the lost years, is to get the victims involved in this dialogue, in creating an urgency, creating a sense of responsibility within the police, within the prosecution, within the judiciary. And I believe the victims have a great role, an important role, and I've experienced this personally, in telling other victims, it is not okay to be silent, it is not okay to be under the self-imposed taboo or stigma. It is not a stigma, it is a crime, and it is in a sense obligatory on the parts of the families to go out and do the right thing by the victim. So I'm a big believer in a very, very heightened visible role for victims and victims' families, provided their anonymity and all of that is maintained. But they can be and must be a big part of what we do going forward.
Yes, but
Yeah, I think that definitely the survivors, as it were, should be involved in being part of the sort of systematic response. And so, for instance, now they have called within this bill, if I presume it will be passed, I'm not sure, but the anti-trafficking anti-human trafficking units at different levels. And definitely survivors should be part of that. And within that, even sort of ones who have been trafficked as children, because for children they are doubly vulnerable, and they are really in all sorts of ways. And I think one of the things is both in terms of seeing what will actually work in terms of the rehabilitation. For instance, the kind of places you have for rescued women are often like detention centers, like jails, and they don't want to be there. I mean, they want to just get out, and you go and visit and you think, but this is for you, but they don't want to be there. And then, but the system just doesn't respond to it. So we need to look at different ways, different means, hear from them what would work. They want to get out, but that's not the way to get them out. And similarly, as a prevention mechanism, because a lot of work, there is the work on the law enforcement side for sure, but it is a social issue as well. And many times the communities and families are often part of it, because it is a huge, it's an organized crime. There is a huge nexus at play. It's absolutely not, that's why it's so big and growing. So a lot of work with the communities, so having survivors work with younger girls, work with people in the communities, having people who are forced into, let's say, harsh labor situations, whether it's for organs, whether it's so that awareness that this could happen to you, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you can report, needs to be there, and survivors should be part of that.
I'd like to add, the model role that victims can play is contingent on a number of factors. First of all, protection should be one of the important elements of the policies. So if protection, both legal, social, etc., is provided to victims, they can play a more active and more tangible role in this. Another issue is that the emphasis should be not only on prevention and prosecution, but social rehabilitation and reintegration into society. So if this is raised as a state policy, then I believe victims will be not stigmatized, and they can say and make more, I would say, effective social role, just disseminating information. They can be much more involved in public awareness, in sensitizing this problem and population. So this is the key, I believe, if we are talking about it.
Dr. Chandrasekhar, the Trafficking in Persons bill was passed in the Lok Sabha yesterday. What are your thoughts on it, and how big a development is this in the fight against trafficking?
So look, here's my view on this. I think there will be the required or the anticipated debate and discourse about whether the bill is perfect. This clause doesn't work and that clause is ambiguous. I've done 12 years of parliament, and I can assure you that no bill has ever been passed that has ever been perfect from the get-go. For me, this bill is an important moment in the overall evolution of India as a much more caring country, a country that's much more responsible about these kind of crimes. It is a bill that is a work in progress. I have absolutely no doubt that over the course of the next 1 or 2 years there will be amendments to that bill. But the bill is clearly centerpiece to the political vision or the national vision that India is no longer open for business to those who want to exploit women, children, boys, etc. Now we need to back this up obviously with the institutional strengths that need to be there, the capacities and capabilities in the various institutions. But this is a good starting point. I am pleased. I've worked very hard for this, so I'm quite pleased that we have gotten to where we have. But it is not done, and it is a work in progress.
May I add something? So this is a good initiative, and it can be only welcome. But the point is that, well, I believe there should be a more broad public discussion preceding, and even after the adoption of this bill. And one more issue. In many countries, very effective laws are adopted, but there is a gap between laws and implementation. So implementation should be immediately focused on, and some kind of bylaws or standard operating procedures should be envisaged to make this law workable, doable, and have an impact, a real impact. If this is not done, well, the efficiency of whatever bill, however effective it may be, will be very superficial.
I just want to say before I.
No, please.
No, he's absolutely right, because if you see the POCSO legislation, it was enacted with a great deal of sincerity and good intentions. But the gap between the POCSO's implementation, the institutional capacities that need to implement POCSO, and the intent of POCSO is still very wide. But the reason I'm optimistic is that there is such a debate and discourse and visibility around this bill, which was not there when POCSO was passed, that I believe that a lot of what has been suggested, the focus on implementation, will be there.
I think that I think it was needed. A new bill on trafficking, and one that looked at it more comprehensively, was needed. But I think that is not. We are a country, actually. We have really good legislation schemes in place. I don't think. I mean, there are some, of course, that need to be changed, but the whole problem is on implementation. And if you look at mentioning POCSO, I was thinking to myself, it was definitely needed. We had nothing for sexual offences against children. It's like in trafficking was only related to sexual exploitation. But look at the resources that we put. We are a country of, nearly 40% are children. Women compose a huge population, and look at the resources that we put into women and child. Look at the resources, the budget allocations for protection. It's less than 1%. I mean, it's less than even 0.5%. So all of this is fine on paper, and when it's all. I mean, it's a whole gamut of things. And we have supposedly a child protection, ICPS, integrated child protection scheme. We're supposed to have district child protection units, etc., of which trafficking, especially where it concerns under 18, should be a part. We have lots of schemes for women, etc., but the money is very small. So we really do need to invest in it as a country. Absolutely think about it. Think about how these bills are going to be rolled out. What are the structures that need to be in place? Who is it that's going to respond? Who's going to work with the police? Because you do need a kind of social worker. It cannot, especially for the victim. The last thing you need is more harassment. And the judiciary, the police, the community, the social element has to be looked at if this bill is going to be successful.
And one more addition, if you allow. I believe that we should not forget that trafficking persons is a major challenge to human rights. This is gross violation of human rights. And any such bill, any bills on countering trafficking persons should be focused on the protection of human rights from this perspective. And trafficking in persons is not something, I would say, separated from other developments and processes in society. And in many cases, this is about social perception of violence, of attitude towards a woman, towards a child, etc., etc. In this sense, I would like to analyze this crime against the backdrop of gender-based violence, for instance. This is something very challenging, and this is about violence against women, this is about violence against children, and it is in the cycle of many people, of many perpetrators, that this can be done. This is not a crime. That women should be treated like not just equals or peers, but something just below that. So this should be ruined. This stereotype should be ruined, and this can be done through education. This can be done through public awareness campaigns and any other measures to sensitize people about this phenomenon.
Mr. Kapinos, how has UNODC responded to this issue globally, and what are some of the good practices that can be brought in?
First of all, we have developed a systematic approach towards combating this kind of transnational organized crime, and this is in most cases transnational organized crime, though even they can be a short distance trafficking, like within the range of 350 kilometers or 500 kilometers, but still, the transnational organized crime structures are involved in a big way in this. So, first of all, our system is based on collecting, collating, and analyzing information. So, without understanding clearly what we are facing, it is impossible to combat this crime or evil. So we organize and we conduct regularly global, regional studies, etc., and share all the relevant information with the member states. Based on it, we help in accessing different international legal instruments like the Palermo Protocol on trafficking in persons. Some of the countries of South Asia have access, but there are some countries which have not. Mm-hmm. So our aim is to assist in every possible accessing this instrument. But after that, another stage is to support the governments in implementing the international provisions through adopting laws. This is also, and the step which was taken by the parliament is in this very direction. But this is not enough. As I mentioned, implementation tools should be also implemented. Based on it, we are involved in institution and capacity building. So all the stakeholders who are involved in this process, and these are not only governmental entities, but judiciary should be. And by the way, one of the latest good examples, which can be very practical and very effective in India, is mock trials. Mock trials. Mm-hmm. I can assure you this will be a very effective and spectacular direction of assistance. So we, for instance, we have some good experience in India. We assisted in establishing anti-human trafficking units within police. So this is a good direction. We arranged capacity building for border security forces and SSB. So this is also good. But still, this is not enough. We should go further and provide capacity building. But once again, capacity building can be only effective subject to the availability of a good, effective governance mechanism. Otherwise, it will be less effective, or no effect will be at all. And based on it, we can build bridges between civil society and the authorities, developing mechanisms on sensitizing and public awareness, and this is very important, involving educational institutions. This is done in India, this is done in other South Asian countries, but the scale should be much bigger. This can be done, I believe, if we are fully supported by every stakeholder. And I would call on the government representatives, on civil societies, civil society organization to be more focused on building such bridges.
So collaborations are key, and we come to a final question that how can we strengthen collaborations between stakeholders to not only break the silos but also collectively address human trafficking? Ms. Vakil.
Well, I think this is a start. I think that it is very important, and I think one of the points that was made that there needs to be the bill on is a good point to bring people around, and I think that there wasn't enough actually dialogue around the bill to look at get other people's input so that there is a complete kind of buy-in in the delivery of it. But now that that's happened, I think again to take it forward, I think it would be very important to have civil society, to have the bureaucracy, politicians, academia. We are just now through the Tata Institute of Social Sciences conducting national level study. I mean, all the data has been collected on trafficking in India. So of course, once that is out, it's a means to share that with everybody, to bring key stakeholders around the table at the state level, especially the national level as well, but especially at the state level, and look at the bill. I think there needs to be much more dialogue around the bill, bring people together, look at how that this is a kind of key challenge that the country faces, the economic costs of it, the of course human social costs of it, and what can be done in a concrete way to take that forward, which would require everybody. And I started with my point of technology. I'm very happy to hear Ms. Chandrasekhar as a technologist, because I think that this is one of the ways where technology, unfortunately, does a lot of good, but this is where it can be abused and used bad to make such things even worse. So how can we use technology to counter this? And I think that there are ways and means to do that, and we should be looking at that. I'm not sure how much the bill addresses that, but we should definitely be looking at that as we go forward. So bring people from that sector in as well.
Dr. Chandrasekhar.
So let me just say this. I think one point maybe people haven't understood. This bill will now come to the Rajya Sabha, and the odds are that this bill will be referred to what is referred to as a select committee. And the select committee, and I've been on many select committees in the Rajya Sabha, which is GST, RERA, and so on. This select committee will then go and do extensive public consultation. So the bill as passed by Lok Sabha is not the bill that will be passed. So there is a window for that consultation to be there. So that's point number one. Point number two, you asked me what are the avenues, or what are the possible collaborations. I think like this, if there are increased collaboration that creates a common narrative. Because I say this because one of the things that I have experienced by dealing with NGOs and activists is everybody looks at it from a very small slice. If there is a common narrative that can be built, working with the UN, working with NGOs and activists and TIS and politicians and MPs, that this is really what the desired outcome should be. Almost like a strategy document for the nation. A 5-pager that says, here is what we want at the policy level, here is what we want at the institutional capacity level, here is what we want in terms of interstate coordination, because as was mentioned, this is not really only about transnational, this is about trans-state. Most of traffic in India happens on the heartline of trafficking, which is the Indian Railways. And that is because jurisdictionally, a child or a woman or a victim is placed on a train somewhere, let's say in Jharkhand, and in 1 hour is out of the reach of the local police. And in 17 hours is in Kerala or in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka. And the police in India is completely technologically unenabled, so that there is no coordination between various jurisdictions. So there is a lot that can be achieved by collaboration. Let there be no doubt on that. And I think this is a good thing to do, and I would encourage it, and I would be happy to bring in more and more MPs into the mix to collaborate with the United Nations and the NGOs and activists, because that is the way we will solve problems. There's no other way of solving problems.
Mr. Kapinos.
Well, it was nice to hear that Rajya Sabha will have its say on the bill.
We always do.
because there were some remarks, critical remarks made by the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. So this may be also taken into account, I believe. But if we are talking about partnerships, so this is really crucial because trafficking persons is a multifaceted phenomenon, and all stakeholders should be involved. So this is about building partnerships, as I mentioned, between different law enforcement agencies, even because in some cases, there is no coordination. Between law enforcement and judiciary, between authorities and civil society and educational institutions, both governmental and unofficial, should be also involved in this. And this is about also building partnerships on a regional scale or international scale. This is about developing good and signing good agreements and developing mechanisms. For instance, the latest development is towards involving South Asian countries into a regional information sharing mechanism on transnational organized crime. This is really of utmost importance. So this project is underway, and we are awaiting official endorsements from the governments of the South Asian countries of this crucial, I would say, development, because it will be of utmost importance because it will entail full-fledged involvement of law enforcement agencies in combating different kinds of transnational or regional crimes, including trafficking in persons, because the share of trafficking in persons is really very high, and both on a global and regional scale. If we are talking about the global scale, this is, as was mentioned, the third largest in terms of coverage, geographical coverage, and financial implications crime. For instance, the figure for 2016 is that the overall turnover of trafficking persons is 150 billion USD. One can only imagine what kind of financial resources the transnational organized crime structures possess. And it means that the law enforcement agencies of different countries should join hands. Because, frankly speaking, we should admit that the main challenge is the transnational organized crime is more adaptive to the process of globalization. They possess huge financial resources, and they can have access to the latest technological achievements, and they hire the top professionals for their criminal activities. And sometimes national law enforcement agencies are bound with observing rules, laws, etc., etc. Well, there are boundaries which cannot be just overcome easily, etc., etc. So this is a challenge. That's why building partnerships, and partnerships can be built on certain principle. One of the principles is sharing information, for instance, involving in joint programs and joint activities. Without this, nothing can be done. And there are good examples. For instance, different UN organizations, they join hands in developing the so-called essential services package. This is an outstanding achievement with a focus on victims, and there are very good accomplishments in this area. So UNODC in this sense join hands with UNDP, WHO, UN Women, and some other UN entities. Another example is last year UNODC has established a platform on combating trafficking in persons, having joined hands with UN Women. This is an open platform, and any either governmental or civil society entity can join it. So this is a very good beginning, which deserves an absolute support from all those who do care about human rights, from those who do care about combating trafficking in persons and the fate of victims. So this should be supported, I believe.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think it was a very informative and enriching discussion, and hope our viewers enjoyed it as well. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much.